This is Roma Agrawal, engineer, author and broadcaster, and you are listening to the Academy's Developing Practice podcast.
Hello and welcome. In this episode, we chat with Roma about her inspirational engineering career and how this has developed into becoming an author and broadcaster. We ask Roma what she's learnt about dealing with professional and personal pressures and challenges, and how she's now inspiring future generations. We hope you enjoy. We have a special University of Liverpool LiveWise episode today, and so I will be co-hosting with Lisa Barker from the Faculty of Science and Engineering. So we thought it would be good, Lisa, just to start by asking you first of all what LiveWise is.
That's great, thanks Alex. LiveWise is Liverpool Women in Science and Engineering and is a society at the University of Liverpool. And our aim is to raise the profile and the interaction between women and STEM, and to provide a platform for our members to exchange experiences, ideas and contacts.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. And I know as part of that you have a programme of events, and that's what brings us into contact with Roma today. So Roma, we're really pleased to be speaking to you. I know you're going to come and speak at an event this evening for the LiveWise Society. Fantastic. Brilliant. So, Roma, thank you for joining us. We're delighted to be speaking to you about building inspiration, both physically during your engineering career and creatively with your books and with your broadcasts. But before we get started, we love to get to know our guests a little bit. It would be great if you tell us a little bit about your background and how you've arrived at the position you're in today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be here. I could answer that question over an hour, but I won't subject you to that. So, about me, I guess I'm a very international person. I've lived in the US, in India, in the UK, a little bit in the Middle East as well. So I've had lots of different exposures to cultures and languages and food and all of that kind of thing. I've always been interested in science, in engineering and maths. Maybe not so much engineering actually, mostly science, mostly physics. And I came to the UK to do my A-levels, went to do physics at university, and then ended up slightly questioning, well, what do I want to actually do with the physics? Mm-hmm. So, going back 20 years, most of the people that studied physics degrees either ended up doing PhDs or working in finance, and neither of these two options appealed to me. So I was lucky enough to be exposed to what engineering is, and the idea that you can apply maths and physics to solving real world problems. And then that's how I became an engineer. I've worked on lots of projects. Most of them are in London, with one exception in Newcastle, which I got to see last week after 15 years. It's still standing, which is always, tick one for a structural engineering project. And as you mentioned briefly, I am now a full-time author, which is not something I ever planned to do in my life.
Fantastic. And can you tell me, was it the people in your lives that helped you to create that kind of passion for science, or where did you get that from? Was it that you were a naturally inquisitive child and that led you to that? Where did that passion come from?
So I think every single child is naturally very inquisitive. I mean, my toddler is certainly at that stage where she throws stuff and breaks stuff, and I'm like, no, this is science. I'm going to not tell her off for that. But I think culturally it's interesting to me because I grew up mostly in India. It's actually being an engineer or a doctor or an accountant are kind of some of the most aspirational careers that parents want their children to do. They're well respected, they're lucrative. And so I was very much kind of brought up in that culture. My mum did maths at university, and my dad was an engineer, but then when we moved back to India, he took over a business. But I was very much surrounded by that, and surrounded by the narrative that basically science will get you far in life.
So when you started working in engineering, how did you manage to get involved in such amazing projects that if you would share with the listeners, that you have been involved with?
Sure. So I joined a graduate program in an engineering consultancy, and the first ever project I worked on was the Newcastle one, which I briefly mentioned. So that's my little baby. And it's this lovely footbridge with beautiful kind of cables coming down from it. So quite an iconic I can't say it's an iconic bridge for Newcastle because Newcastle has some really stunning bridges, but in my mind it is. And the second project I worked on was the Shard, and that's the tallest building in this country. It's on the River Thames. It's basically like an elongated pyramid, if you haven't seen what it looks like. And I mean, it was luck, probably. I was just in a great team and my boss got assigned these fabulous projects. But then I think once I got stuck into the projects and I realised that I could learn so much. So even though I spent 6 years of my career on the Shard, on the one building, I did different aspects of it. I worked in different materials. I worked with different teams of people. So it definitely didn't feel like that long a time, which is like 2 degrees if you think about it, right? Like it's a really, really long time. So yeah, it was one of those really fortunate things, really.
And what would you say has been your most passionate project that you've been involved with from an engineering perspective?
Ooh, I would probably go back to my bridge in Newcastle. Aww. So yeah, no, because it was just me and my boss that worked on that. So a really tiny team of structural engineers. So I basically got to get my hands dirty with all of it. It was the first time I'd ever been on a construction site. It was the first time I'd kind of gone and counted reinforcement bars to make sure that things were working. It was the first time I went to a steel factory. So I've got all these incredible memories associated with that project.
Fantastic. Just listening to you speak, I think in my head, because I don't know much about engineering, it's very sciencey, but listening to you speak, that you get excited about the creativity as well. You're talking about the beautiful bridges and, how beautiful the buildings are. So I guess this is a career that merges the two, the science and the creativity. When the Shard was going up, I was working in London at the time, and it was lovely to see the work that happened. And that is a beautiful building. It's not just a structurally stunning building, but it's beautiful to look at as well. So I guess, is there something in that in terms of that kind of merging of the creativity with the science?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think people watching the construction of the Shard were really captivated by it. And I think it's not very common that you get to see something grow like that onto a skyline. So certainly that, I think, was one of the reasons people are so captured by that building. I absolutely believe that engineering is an extraordinarily creative profession and job to do, and a process as well, because engineering is also a verb, right? And I actually think science is creative as well, but I completely get where you're coming from. So you're kind of bringing the forces of nature, the stuff that is as it is, the physics, the gravity or whatever. So we've got a problem to solve, and we often haven't seen exactly that problem in that exact configuration. So you want to try and solve it now in a way where, it's kind of environmentally friendly. It works for the city, the context that you're in. You want it to look great. You want it to be able to be built safely. And then, of course, it needs to be within budget and all these other things. Trying to solve these very multifaceted problems is what I think is creative. You're doing things in a way that haven't been done before.
Yeah, fantastic. And the Shard is a fantastic example of that. So how did you get involved in that team? What a privilege to be part of the group of people who worked on that project.
It totally was. I mean, I was 23 years old, and again, it was one of those situations where I worked for the company got the project, and then my boss asked me, would you like to work on the Shard? And I was like, yes, I would. Like internally going, yeah, kind of brilliant. Holding it back a little bit. But I got to work on the foundations of the building. And we talk about creativity. The foundations of the building were built by a technique which had never been done before in that context. Nobody will ever see it. Nobody will really ever know unless people like me go out and talk about it. But there was a huge amount of creativity in the way we cast the concrete for the foundations. And then I did some bits in the middle, and then I did the top of the building as well, which was a completely different set of challenges. And then I haven't said this in a long time, but I mentioned this to someone last week. The most glamorous bit of the Shard that I designed was some steel supports for urinals in the hotel.
Brilliant.
So there you go, a full range of stuff.
Fantastic. Well, obviously needed, so that's good. Great. And do you get to go back to visit the Shard much?
I've tried the whole, do you know who I am? Yes. And can you let me up the viewing gallery for free thing? But it doesn't work. But what's one of the joys of the Shard? I mean, yes, the bar and the restaurants are not cheap, but you can go in there. So you can get a lift up there and have a wander around, get a coffee. And so that's really lovely.
Well, I mean, there must have been a lot of excitement creating and being part of a team that does something like the Shard. but there must have also been an awful lot of pressures and challenges, not just doing the project, but professionally and personally. So how did you deal with those kind of challenges, if you will?
Yeah, so I think the personal challenge for me at the time was being able to get my head around all the different things happening on this building. So there was the fact that, we were surrounded by so much stuff in the middle of central London. There's a bus station, a train station, there's tube lines, there's a hospital across the street. There's people, it's one of the busiest train stations in the country. Then you have the actual materials themselves. So I had done a little bit of steel and concrete design at this point, but this was, blown up in scale compared to what I'd done before. So, there was just a huge amount of learning. I was working with one of the world's most well-known architects. So there's how do you build relationships with architects? How do you communicate with architects? How do you bring your ideas to the table to people who might not understand all the jargon? And then, yes, from externally, there was all this pressure about, media scrutiny, people looking at the project going, when is it going to be built? What's it going to be like? Who's going to have access to it? What's it going to mean for this particular council? And so on. So there's lots and lots of questions being asked about the building. I think for me, where I was at in my career at the time, my focus was mainly on the technical stuff. And then I got a bit more interested in the more external stuff, I think, as I kind of worked my way through the project.
Mm-hmm. And did you find it interesting as well as challenging, juggling so many different aspects of what would be an enormous project?
I really loved it. And I think that's one of the reasons, I was sort of saying that even though I spent so much time on it, it didn't feel that way because there are lots and lots of mini projects almost within that. So there was times when I was liaising with the rail companies, trying to make sure that their assets were protected, but at the same time that we could build near them or over them or under them or whatever. Yeah. And then on the other hand, you might be speaking to the steel fabricators saying, how do we make this particular junction of bolts fit together? So it was a hugely varied experience. And yeah, it was a great team of engineers to work with. So I really learnt kind of my engineering off that project.
It's amazing how you're still so passionate about it, though. It's fantastic.
And have you got any tips for our listeners in terms of how to juggle that pressure, maybe personally? So obviously you've talked about the team, but is there anything that you learned maybe about yourself and that you could pass on in terms of juggling that pressure professionally?
When I was that age in my 20s, I don't think I felt the pressure that much in that sense. Engineering doesn't tend to be the kind of cutthroat, long hours, work every day, weekend type culture. And I think that's a really important thing, is to make sure that you do have that balance in your life. Ask questions. For me, I must have asked the people sitting around me dozens of questions every day until they probably got fed up with me, but that's how you learn. And that's one of the things I think about with remote working and why that balance is important, that young engineers coming up and starting out in their career need to be able to just have those chats and ask those questions. So I think that would be my biggest thing, is to ask the questions. And then if you are feeling the pressure, the world was different 15 to 20 years ago when I was doing it. The world's very different. If you are feeling the pressure, then it's definitely worth talking to somebody about it.
Brilliant. Well, in addition to your career in engineering, you're also an author and a broadcaster. And I have to say, your books are beautiful. I've actually bought them for my nephew. He's turning 15 this Christmas, and he wants to become an engineer. And I know Brilliant. He's going to love your book. It's beautifully put together. And I've got both of them here. So what inspired you to write books about engineering?
So I would start by saying that I hate writing, which is not probably a very encouraging thing to say. I hated it, I should say, and now I'm challenged by it. So I'll slightly tone down my language, but I still find it really, really hard. It's not my natural place to be. I like numbers and graphs and computer programs. What inspired me was, as the Shard was coming close to its conclusion, a few of us on the team were out there speaking about the Shard to loads of engineers, not only all around the UK, but also around the world. And we were doing these very technical presentations about soil structure analysis and the facade interfaces and all this kind of stuff. But I think because of who I am, which is basically a young brown woman, not so young anymore, but at the time, I started getting invitations from schools, from universities, from women's leadership groups, like LiveWise, for example, saying, you're a really interesting character. Can you come in and tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and so on? And it kind of rolled from there. So I realized that people don't understand what engineering is, what engineers do, what engineers look like or can look like, the creativity involved in it, the history, the stories, all of this richness that engineering contains. I don't think we communicate well. And I just decided I want to communicate that. So talks is my natural place, speaking and all of that is great. The writing I find more challenging, I think, because it's solitary and I like being in a team. But at some point I realized that there's only so many presentations I can do and there's only so many places I can be. And actually, if I create something that, people can hold with their hands or flick through, then it's always there. And then I started this weird and wonderful publishing career.
Yeah, fantastic. And your book, How Was That Built? Has got these beautiful illustrations that kind of bring to life the words on the page. Was that important to you, having those pictures in there as well?
Yeah, so Built, my adult book, came out in 2018, and I did my own little tiny illustrations in that, just a few of them dotted around here and there, just in black and white. Because I think in terms of communication, visual communication is so important in engineering and design. You need to be able to just sketch things. So my drawings are not sophisticated and they were just done with a black pen, but that's enough to get a principle across. But when it came to writing the children's version, I really, really wanted to work with an experienced artist to really bring it to life in a way that young people would love and understand. And so my publisher brought on board Katie Hickey, who's an incredible artist. And I think what I particularly loved about her work is the little bit of cheekiness and warmth and humour and fun that she's brought to the book. So yes, she's illustrated how compression and tension work in a beam, for example, but there's also the picture of a man pooing. I don't know if you've spotted that yet, but the kids love it. And it just brings that level of warmth, I think. It's unexpected, that bringing together of kind of technical engineering and beautiful art, I think, is quite an unexpected combination. And I think we've really succeeded in that.
You have, absolutely. And I'm sure it's going to be key to, inspiring that future generation. Is that something that's important to you?
100%. The whole other topic we could talk about for hours is the diversity issue in engineering. And as a woman of colour, I'm really in a tiny minority of engineers that look like me or that I look like. I think the women statistic is improving. So we're up to about 16% now. When I started, it was below 10%. People of colour are very disproportionately low in my industry, which is kind of strange because on one hand, our culture often really promotes engineering, but the way, the schooling, education, the system is all set up, there's this imbalance that we see. And I think for me, what's really important about the books is basically getting out there to people who might not normally access engineering or think that engineering's for them, to try and really say, you can do this. Yes, it might be tough, and yes, there might be challenges along the way, but you can do this. But other people like you have done it and are doing it. And hopefully it just kind of inspires them to consider it as an option.
That's great. I mean, do you have any other exciting projects on the horizon?
Well, so Nuts and Bolts, which is my third book, comes out in March, which I'm actually really excited about. I'm so excited I'm wearing an earring that I bought from Etsy, which is like a nut and a bolt. Yeah. So it's all on brand.
Is that aimed at children or adults?
Well, so the one coming out in March will be the adult book, and then I am working on the children's version as well. So I seem to be in this nice rhythm of adult books and children's books, which is great. So Nuts and Bolts has been my pandemic project. So I've been working on it for coming up to 3 years now. Some of the hardest years of my life. Some of the hardest years, I'm sure, for many people's listening's life. And so I'm very kind of emotionally attached to this book. But I think what is special for me about this book is that it covers a full range of engineering. So it's not just about civils or structures, which in itself is a huge topic. But here I'm looking at really the fundamentals. So, in front of us on the table we're sat at, I can see keys, I can see a laptop, I can see a mic, phones, a pen. So if you actually dismantle any of these objects, you might find that there are a lot of similarities in the fundamental pieces that make them up. So the ballpoint pen will have a spring in it, for example, and our laptops, every single key has a spring underneath it. And then the mic will, and not this particular mic, but mics are often mounted on some kind of spring system to absorb sound. And so I broke down what I think is all our complex engineering to the 7 most fundamental objects. And then I've gone and explored their origins, the amazing people behind them, and also, most importantly, the impact that they can have on society, good and bad.
Fantastic. That's great. And I'm sure, adults and children will really enjoy reading those books and be inspired by them. Is there anything else that you use in terms of inspiring the next generation? Any other medium that you're involved with?
Yes, so I am on social media. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Roma the Engineer, and I often share just, things that I see around me, things that I find exciting, interesting in some way. And lots of images of my knitting as well at the moment, which is an engineering challenge in my opinion, but that's maybe a different episode. I use YouTube, so I have a bank of about 20 odd films, which I don't think a single one is longer than 2 minutes, and they have little mini demonstrations of some of the principles I talk about in my books. So that could be my little thing where I use Maltesers and raisins to explain how the structure of iron and steel are different. Or it could be a kind of terrible recreation of a cathedral in Mexico that has a pendulum in the middle of it, trying to explain how movement in the foundation can be indicated by a pendulum moving. So there's a big kind of range of stuff on YouTube, which, if you've just got a couple of minutes, then I would definitely recommend go and have a look at those. I also have a podcast which is called Building Stories, where I've done a few short episodes about built. I've got a special interview with Katie, who we talked about the illustrator on how was that built. And next year I'll be involved in another podcast. So yeah, definitely watch this space.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, Roma, it's been really lovely chatting with you, and thank you so much for your time. This podcast is called the Developing Practice Podcast, and we love to finish each recording leaving with the listeners 2 or 3 take-home tips that they can take away and reflect on in terms of their own personal practice. So if you left us with a couple of tips, what would it be?
So the asking questions one we've talked a little bit about, and I think is absolutely crucial. But the last message I'd really like to leave with your listeners is to stay curious. And I say stay because we are all naturally curious. And I would just encourage and inspire people to look around them a little bit and just wonder, how old is that brick that I see on that building across the road from me? Where did that come from? What material was that made from? What people were involved in its creation? Or what's under my feet? Are there train lines? Are there cables and ducts and sewers? There could be all kinds of stuff. And just keep asking those questions. Just keep wondering about the world around you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. That's been fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Roma. Her passion for engineering was so evident. I found that what she said about engineering being an incredibly creative profession and process, where engineers work to solve multifaceted problems in unique and creative ways, was really interesting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed listening in on that conversation. It was clear. Roma's worked on some incredible engineering projects, and the Shard is one of my favourite modern buildings. I particularly liked what Roma said about how she deals with challenges that she's faced when working on these amazing projects. She spoke about the importance of asking questions to deal with challenges and not to struggle alone, which I think is a really important message.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. Well, if you'd like to take your thinking further, we've added some resources, including the links to Roma's books to the website on a specific podcast reading list, which you can access at liverpool.ac.uk/the-academy/podcast. And we always love to hear what you think about each episode. So please do tweet us at Live Uni Academy,
And you can also find us at eLearnerMatt or at Alexandra_Owen on Twitter.
And we're really grateful for those who have taken the time to either rate or review our show in your podcast provider's app. So if you haven't done so already, please do take the time to review our show, or even better, simply share the episode with friends and colleagues on your social media. Bye for now.